Hello and welcome to the Varietal Show. If you've never been here before, you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page. I'm Rory, and this is just kind of a cozy place for narrative. If you are here from the Tuesday night streams where we read folklore and fairy tales alive, that is not so much what this show is. This show is us writing together. We're going to use a bit of a game to structure prompts and try to create a story or scenes or scenarios or whatever else. So if that sounds fun to you to have in the background, if you want to dump some suggestions my way, I try to incorporate everyone I get. There's a little live chat that lets you do that. I see GS is already in there. Hello, GS. It says good evening. But if you're not watching this live, you can also, you have an additional option. Down in the description below, you can click on timestamps and it'll jump you ahead to different parts of the show, depending on what interests you the most. For example, if you just want to know the results. Yeah, anyways, that's about it. We play games and we write because I like writing. I don't know about you folks. Anyways, it is a humid day here. How's it? Oh, there's Witchery. Hello, Witchery. Hello, GS. How's the weather over where you folks are? It's good and humid here. Okay, I'm not going to blow too much time here today because, well, it is warm. So I want to make sure that we get a chance to get to it. Tonight's game is actually quite simple, so I think we'll probably have a good time with it. Remember my own layout. There it is. So let's get on to the description of what we're doing. This part of the show is called litgames, which stands for literature games, but it has like 10,000 different names. Solo tabletop RPGs, story gens, lyric games. I don't know. There's like 50 other names for them. A lot of them are the ones we're playing are from itch.io or itch.io if you're a cool kid. But I basically just use them as ways to sort of create writing because I like writing. If you have questions about that or the game or the writing or anything, come on down to the live chat and ask me. Tonight's game is called Excursions and Enchantments, which is not the most descriptive name, so I'm going to have to tell you what it's about. I would say it's really more of a story gen game or a prompt game. I do think you're actually originally meant to go to an actual cafe, observe your surroundings, and then use this as a way to sort of magicify them. There are some little bits in the text that seem to indicate that. Obviously, we're not going to be doing that. I don't think it's entirely necessary either. The premise is, for one reason or another, I think in the advertising for this, I said you drank a certain tea. You can now see the Fey Realm, and what you discover is that the Fey Realm has a bunch of secret cafes that are hidden all over the world, what I call Fey Starbucks. And you're going to go in and have some things there and describe what you see. And that's pretty much it. It's really a description exercise as if you're a writer who's looking for something to do. Think of it as like a drill in descriptions and world building through experiential description. So it's a one-page tabletop RPG. Most of that is consumed by D6. So if you want to play this yourself, which I think it's free on itch.io, when the video is no longer live, I'll have a pinned comment with the link. You just need a D6 dice, which is for most people just what you would call a dice. For dorks like me, there's like several different dice, so we have to define it. If you ever hear D something, that's just how many sides are on the dice. So D6, there's D4s, D8s, D12s, D20s, which is the core of most Dungeons and Dragons for the last 20 years. Witchery says eating fairy food is a quick way to die, LMAO. It's a good way to also get permanently enslaved or enslaved for 7 years, which will feel like 7 days. It depends on where you're from, really. In general, two things you don't want to do with the Fae. Don't want to give them your name, and don't want to eat the things they give you. But we're going to kind of look past that. Well, we could use that in the story. I did have this thought in the back of my head, but I'm not sure if I could really actually world build this into a story in the time we have, was that it basically would be run by humans who were tricked by Fae to work here as baristas, because I felt like there was a good meta commentary there, but I don't know if I'm going to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to read it because it's very short, the rules of the game. As a patron of cafes near and far, you have often found yourself in unfamiliar ones. As someone newly gifted with fairy sight, a whole new world has opened up to you, which includes a whole new world of cafes to visit. Prepare yourself with a 6-sided die, which we have, a coin, which I have my awesome Metroid coin, a writing implement, which we're going to use Google Docs, and a notebook whenever you wish to visit one of these Fey cafes. Additional entertainment such as a book, magazine, or game console is optional. That's what makes me think they're probably actually expecting you to go to cafes, or maybe that's just a joke. But obviously, this is a game about writing. So when we get to a cafe, so we'll have a little description and a little introduction of our character. If one of you wants to volunteer a character for this story, let me know right now. Like, start putting details in the chat or little bits in the chat. We'll cobble together a character who recently acquired Fey sight somehow. But when they go to a cafe, we will roll a d6 to figure out what its design theme is, which is here. Where it's located, like how you find it, which can be anything from just a normal cafe place to like the center of a tree. Its ambiance, and then you flip a coin to find out if it's an extensive or limited menu. I also would like to, play around with the weird kind of drinks and magic stuff you can get in these shops, if people have ideas about that. And that's it. It's just us going to cafes, and we'll see if we can find a story in it. And if not, at least we'll exercise some description. We usually find stories. Stories are like the Fae. You gotta kind of trick them into showing themselves. Witchery says, don't offend the Fae either. Yeah, but the problem is like, God knows what offends them. They get offended by the weirdest things, depending on the tale. Witchery also says, if I tried to discreetly play a game at a cafe, that die would 100% end up on or under someone else's table. Yeah, I'm terrible at rolling dice off the table. Yeah. Okay. The Fae Starbucks. Okay, let's get into the character. Just give me some character prompts if you guys have them. It can be anything from like hair color to height or whatever to backstory, age. I don't know, anything like that. Toss something out there in the world. Don't worry about making it super creative or anything if you don't want to. It's just sort of prompts for me to build a bit of a character who's going to go around and visit these various Fae Starbucks. We usually do young people. What if we did an older person? When I was a young girl. Holly's House says, please have a gnome. Done. Just, you'll have to remind me when we get to the cafe. I've been playing what's called a CRPG, which is a bit of a dated term because it stands for computer role-playing game, and it was from an era like in the 90s where basically your two options for role-playing game was tabletop or a very specific style of computer game version of D&D. And so they just called them CRPGs, but obviously there's like 10,000 different styles of RPG you can play now. So really what it is sort of top-down. It usually runs on a tabletop system or some version of it, like Baldur's Gate and early Fallouts and stuff. But the one I'm playing is Pathfinder's Kingmaker. And in it, there's a gnome character, and in Pathfinder's lore, there's this idea that gnomes can live forever, but they don't because what's called of bleaching, where their hair becomes pale, their skin becomes pale, and their soul becomes pale. If they don't keep pursuing new experiences, if they start to become placid, they eventually just fade away and die. I thought it was a really cool concept, and so as a result, all the gnomes you meet are very eager to do anything sort of exciting, pranks, adventures, anything like that, because it extends their life to do so. I never used to... How about this? When I was a young girl, I saw the Fae that danced on the dewy sills, the dewy leaves, outside my window in the early dawn. But my mother said I didn't. So I didn't. Witchery says Diablo is like that too, isn't it? So I haven't played Diablo. Diablo is like an action isometric, I guess you would call it, or whatever. And the problem with isometric, it's so stupid, but it's enough to make me not play them. The problem with isometric is because the perspective is kind of wonky on isometric. Like isometric doesn't have perspective. It doesn't have horizon lines and stuff. That's the whole idea. So when you go to hit something, sometimes if the character is like here on the screen and something's above it, I'll think I'm closer to it than I am and I'll miss. And if something is below me because it looks further away because of how isometric works, I'll think I'm far enough away and they'll hit me, and I just can't adjust. And I don't know why. And as a result, like I have friends who are nuts for Diablo and I never play it. But if that's what you mean. Holly's House says a young girl gnome, she is totally addicted to the fall release of the Mushroom Bloom Brew. Ugh. Come on, words. With acorn foam. I like how this is going. I'm going to do my character introduction. You keep piling ideas in the chat. We'll come back. We'll make a cafe and we'll have a visit to a cafe, and that'll probably be it. I saw the Fae that danced on the dewy leaves outside my window in the early dawn, but my mother said I didn't, so I didn't. I ignored the songs I heard from the brook along the path that wound between my home and school. Because my teachers said they weren't there. They weren't being sung by anyone. So it went until it all went. And I heard and saw the Fae no more. GS says that's fascinating about the gnomes. Yeah, I thought it was a really cool premise. Like, I'll tell you, for as much of a fantasy person as I am, I'm actually really quite an irritable old man about excessive world building in fantasy, which is weird to say because I really like Lord of the Rings, and he sort of has a reputation of being the most excessive about that. But I argue he doesn't, because whenever I read parts of his world, they usually deepen his themes and feel very sort of in line with storytelling. What I mean is, like, when I pick up a book and it's like, you know, sci-fi or something, and it's like it's $9 cryo dollars and they're digital sunglasses, and I'm doing a bad job, but like where they start describing like economy and stuff like this, I get that people like that, but I feel like it gets further and further away from anything to do with a story, theme, metaphor, or anything of personal significance, and more it just becomes a place to be. And I don't really like stories that are about ignoring your whole life. I like stories that are a space you occupy that metaphorically helps you through your life. And I feel like Lord of the Rings, for all its world building, it always kind of leans towards its own themes, whereas I feel like a lot of world building, like with, as much as I liked it, as people like George R.R. Martin, you know, he has these really, really long, wide, vast family trees that he loves to build, but what does it really add to an actual story? That someone is related to someone who's related to someone is related to someone. At some point, it just feels like busy work, background noise. So, I appreciate, like, to me, it's about art. It's not about immersion, I guess, if that makes sense. It's not that I'm not saying I don't care about immersion, but I just don't feel like that's the point. Anyways. So it went until it went, and I heard and saw the Fae no more. Witchery says it adds a good excuse not to write the next book. Yeah, I have opinions on why that happened. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the man. This is just me speculating from my own experience. Witchery says Tolkien does have some long trees. Yeah, he's got a big of thing for trees. Some Silmarillion might go on a little bit too much about the trees. Shut up about the trees. For anyone who knows that reference. So it went until it went, and I heard and saw the Fae no more. Soon, I was a wife and a mother. I saw some happy days and many more sad ones, but I lived my life in a practical way. When my husband, there we go, passed on, however, and the children soon stepped in larger shoes and wandered off out the door. I found myself hearing the melodies of the brook once more. Oh, nah, family trees, Witchery says. Yeah, that's true. He does do some long family trees, but like, you know, George R.R. Martin did a book that was just kind of nothing but family trees. And a lot of the twists in his stories, and this is a criticism I have for a lot of fantasy, not just him. A lot of twists in stories comes down to actually they're brothers, or actually they're sisters, or he's actually his father. But they haven't really earned it on any metaphorical or significant level. It's just sort of a neat fact at that point, because like blood relations don't usually affect that much. And I get that it's supposed to be about who gets the throne and stuff, but then they establish in the first book that doesn't matter. So I don't know. It seemed like there was so much discourse about who was related to who, and I just didn't care. I'm not saying that no one needs to not care about these things. Yeah, Witchery says because he doesn't want to write the last book. Well, he wrote himself into another knot. Yes, that is what he did. He wrote himself into a knot. Here's my theory. I was going to say, here's my theory in a nutshell as to what happened with George R.R. Martin. It is, as a writer, you're always kind of looking for something exciting that'll push a person to the next page. And the easiest way to create something exciting is to put a hook in of something weird and new. The problem is, eventually you have to end the story. And the story, when you put hooks in, everyone assumes those hooks are going to all intertwine to a great big braid at the end where everything makes sense, or most things make sense. Otherwise, you feel like, why did I waste my time on that hook? And the books, way more than the TV series, have so much of that, so much complexity and addition. And I think at some point he kind of didn't think about the fact, how do I wrap all this up in a way that they in any way interrelate? Yeah, Witchery, you've said my feelings right there. I do always find it funny when people worry about who has the right to the throne. You have the right to the throne if you can get it and keep it. Simple. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like that's the point of the first book. So why is it so many twists rely on who's related to who? Who cares? Okay, so we have our person who is now getting back their face sight. I thought perhaps it was my mind slipping, as old earls had not 2 years before his passing. However, one day I saw, and now we roll some d6s. It's 1, 2, 3, right? 1, 2, 3, and a coin flip. Okay. I'm gonna roll my 3d6s. First one is a 1. 1 is the design theme is flowers and vines. And the second one is a 4, which is location at the top of a tree. How is an elderly woman getting to the top of the tree? Is anyone an elderly woman and can tell me what would be the most realistic way for that to happen? And then the last one is a 3. The ambiance is peaceful. And finally, heads, tails. This is about the size of the menu. It's tails, which means it is a limited menu. Okay, folks, breathe the clean air, close your eyes, and think deeply on what a Fey cafe looks like. GS says genealogists care. Yeah, but that's not a reason to tell a story. I don't know about an old lady being peaceful at the top of a tree. Okay, well, maybe that's our first thing to address, is how she would get up there. One day, as the dusk was creeping over the blue sky with its plumes of violet and burning orange. Violet and fire? Yeah. Oh, what's her name? Holly says it is inside a tree. That is a great idea. We can shift it, because actually that is a different option. Inside a tree hollow is number 5. We can shift it to that. Let's do that. Give me a name that of somebody who is like at least 70. A woman's name of at least 70. So I have a character name here. Janet. Okay. However, one day, as the dusk was creeping over the blue sky with its plumes of violet and fire, Janet saw a glimmer of lantern light emanating from the hollow of a large tree. As she stepped closer, carefully placing her walker between the great oak's roots, just waiting for Google Docs. I really should make a new Google document, but I've had this one going now for over 2 years, 2.5 years, and I have such a sentimental attachment to it. Between the great oak, between where the great oak's roots poked. And up their knuckles. She began to make out songs. Witchery says, wait, you're doing this all in one doc? Yeah, I don't know why, but I just did. We could go, I don't even know if it would crash if I went to the bottom of it, but we could go back to the beginning of the doc. At which point, I think it was a story I wrote with Dana and Avalon, who wants to do more book club stuff. I just haven't had the mental space for it. A story about Elon Musk on Mars, if I recall. She began to make out songs that took her back to her childhood hikes to school. The tree itself was shrouded in morning glory. Vines that burst with morning glory. Blooms. But these were not the bone white of a typical morning glory. Instead, they were many-colored and shifting with the sounds from within the tree. Like so many ripples across a vast pond. Holly South said she definitely wouldn't have a walker. She'd be using a gnarled walking stick. Oh, that's a good point. I guess that's an easy enough fix. Placing the old gnarled walking stick that Earl had carved. Okay. She noticed that the flowering vines hung over a tree hollow. About as wide as a bike tire. It's a stupid analogy. About as wide. If I was like a cool streamer, I'd have some button I'd push and it'd be like a graphic and it'd be like, analogies, please, or something. How would you describe that? About as wide as what? It's like, I mean, I'm trying to fit it on camera. It's got to be just small enough that you couldn't have easily gotten in. I'm going to keep thinking about it while I drink some water. If you want to know what writing is, this is most of it. Holly's House says, wide as a stream after a rain. That is a beautiful way to put it, but that unfortunately is a little undefined. That could be wide enough. What I want to establish is it's not quite wide enough that you could get in there easily, because I want to set up a situation where they have to do Faye stuff to get her to fit in the cafe. But I'm gonna steal that analogy later, I think. Witchery says, for me, writing is doing something else until my brain works. I'm kind of always writing. Writing is like the end state of me just being completely detached from the world and immersed in my own imagination, which is how I live a great deal of my life. Hung over a tree hollow. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is a large pizza, but that is like so not Faye. How about this? About as wide as a... as her grandmother's... Oh, what are they called? The little piece of furniture that, like Victorian era, that had a mirror above it. What are those called? Where, you know, you used to wash up. We got some other analogies. Could be wide enough for an owl. Yeah, owls are... If you've ever seen an owl in person, like close up, which I saw at a place here we have called Capilano Suspension Bridge, they have birds of prey for some reason. Vanity, that's right. As wide as her grandmother's vanity mirror. Everyone in chat is like, you twit. Vanity. Anyways, if you ever see one in person, they're massive birds. Some birds are just so much bigger than you think they are. They're like almost the size of small bears, some of them. Not wool owls exactly, but some of them there are. Witchery says the most common owl in the world is the barn owl. It is found on 6 continents. How is that possible? It can't have crossed the waters. How is that possible? People would have, like, I get rats. Those can hide on ships, but an owl's not hiding on a ship. Apparently owls are actually quite dumb. She noticed that the flowering vines hung over a tree hollow about as wide as her grandmother's old vanity mirror. Hung when she pulled the drapery of greenery aside, she found a wondrous sight. The tree's hollow Witchery says, yeah, it can. Can it really fly that far? I mean, yeah, you can. I know Indonesia isn't that far off of Australia, as you mentioned. That's still quite far. I guess if they can rest. You can get to most continents by land bridge or short sea crossing. But like the land bridge between North America and Europe is frozen. I don't know if an owl could survive that. I don't know. I don't actually know. Biology and such are not my strong points. She found a wondrous sight. The tree's hollow was a peaceful cafe of small tables and low blooms and low murmurs in strange tongues. There was a band. What was the gnome you wanted to involve Holly's house? Talked about squirrels being the. I like that idea. Squirrels being the thing, but a young girl gnome. Oh yes, I see. Witchery says snowy owls. Can snowy owls really deal with like proper ice, or is it just like they can deal with mountains? Because like I'm talking about sea ice here where polar bears live. I don't even know if there's trees for them. I genuinely just don't know. I'd be curious to know. It's possible that it's just a genus that was around that long. There was a band. If anyone wants to have some fun description with the band, go to town. There was a band in the Witchery says they live in the Arctic. They do, but there's levels of Arctic, right? Like there is sort of the Yukon and Northwest Territories, northern areas there, where you still kind of are a forest, but it's cold. And then there's the Arctic Circle, and that's more what the traversal of the land bridge is like, where it's just blank, constant blowing wind and incredibly cold temperatures. Actually, speaking of cold temperatures, I just learned about a thing called frost hollows, and it was fascinating. There was a band playing... You know what? I'm going to let the group chat give me some band stuff. There was a band playing low, peaceful music. If If we want to expand on that band, now's the time. Can you order dandelion shots in your smoothies? For sure. The snowy owls don't live in forests. They don't live in trees. They don't like trees. Really? That surprises me. Do they perch on cliffs? Because it's hard for me to imagine them just hanging out on the ground. Flute, sure. Playing low. The band was playing low, peaceful music that was accompanying a satyr's mournful flute solo. There were two fairies. There were two fairies playing a game with a cricket in a cage who spoke with a London accent and seemed quite perturbed at how they flicked and bothered him. Witchery says there's actually several types of ground owl. I didn't know that. That surprises me. It's hard for me to imagine how that's advantageous for a bird. Seemed quite perturbed at how they flicked and bothered him. Are barn owls ground owls? Because we were talking about barn owls, of course. And seemed quite perturbed at how they flicked. All Janet could discern was that he seemed to insist that this was not a fair deal. Janet knew better. Than to intervene on the ill-fated mortals whom Fae have captured and transformed. Witchery says no, but they are on every continent. Yeah, so like the origin of the conversation was how the hell did they get there? It's hard for me to imagine, and I was talking about the land bridge there is so frozen. It's hard for me to imagine a bird being able to get across it, but I don't know. I mean, it must have. Have captured and transformed. Janet knew better than to intervene on the ill-fated mortals whom Fae have captured and transformed. Witchery says aside from Antarctica, well, I mean, give it time. That might be the only place any of us can live soon. Whom Fae have captured and transformed. Janet knew better than to intervene on the ill-fated mortals whom Fae had captured and transformed. Especially this unfortunate Londoner cricket. Gia says, I'm ordering a square of mushroom fudge. Ooh. Let's get that gnome in, because that was requested. So the gnome... Janet's seemed to not have attracted much attention, though her face filled most the doorway. To this strange little hollow. Witchery says it hasn't always been the same amount of frozen, though. Yeah, like I said, I don't know. I suspect it's fluctuated. I mean, it was all, at one point, one landmass as well, so who knows. The, if it's a cafe, it has to be a resident artist, a talented one, or one who comes daily, but never seems to improve. Okay, well, we'll roll that in with the gnome. How about that? In fact, most in this peaceful cafe seemed not to were more, come on, there we go, were more invested in an argument between a rosy-cheeked right, that's the name. There we go. Rosy-cheeked gnome who was arguing with one of the many squirrel baristas. The gnome was pleading what was it? The mushroom brew with the acorn foam. There we go. The gnome was pleading for a freshen up to her empty cup with something called mushroom brew with acorn foam. When Janet searched the menu over the barista's work area, she couldn't see such a thing listed. The squirrel, who rasped with a world-weary East Coast accent, I already told you. I already told you, Bethany. The menu here is limited. We weren't supposed to make you that in the first place. And I am especially not making it for free. The gnome Bethany stomped her foot. And with flushed, angry cheeks, sputtered out the words, "It's not free. It's a trade, furball. I'm going to give you a signed original for a simple drink." Bethany waved a peeled piece of birch bark. The Janet could just discern had a sketch of a fairy whose legs were of uneven length, and whose head held no reasonable proportion to the body. The smears of many rubbings by an eraser revealed to her the other experiments in poor proportion that the young gnome artist had done that day. In all, Janet thought the work was decent. Or at least didn't want to say otherwise. It certainly wasn't what she would call a finished product. Feeling bad for the frustrated little artist gnome, Janet finally spoke up and said, "Well, how much is it then for a mushroom, the foam mushroom thing?" The band flute solo suddenly spiked into a shriek that echoed the gasps and shock of all the Fae in the cafe. GS says, Artist Gnome is a fixture. Everybody fawns over his work. It's a tradition. Not sure what you mean by that. GS says, but the pine nuts and little nut dishes are free. Nutshell dishes are free. That's adorable. I think I can use that here. That echoed the gas and shock of all the Fae in the cafe. Someone even spilled. It's not even close to how that's spelled. Even spilled their little dish, their little half shell of pine nuts. Across the floor. In fact, I don't need in fact here. The squirrels were the least surprised. Having dealt with old ladies more than most. The squirrel raised an eyebrow and said, "Since you seem to have the Fae sight, I can offer you and the gnome here a drink. It's a policy that should the tall folk of the common world find a cafe of the Fae, they get a free drink." Oh, GS says, don't mind me making character errors. You'd have to be here and see how many individuals are interacting here. Oh, that's cool. I have a whole crowd there. Tall folk of the common world find a cafe of the Fae, they get a free drink. The squirrel curled his fuzzy lip into a snarling grin. The gnome smiled at this and said, "Oh, well, as a thanks, you can have a signed original." She passed Janet her flawed and ill-proportioned sketch with all the confidence of Picasso. Thank you, Bethany. Janet said, 2 mushrooms with a foam up, cried out one of the squirrels and slid 2 cups. The gnome grabbed them both and said, "Oh dear, Janet. Here you go. But with a wink, she dropped Janet's cup and let it spill upon the floor. Janet was disappointed until she heard the growl of the squirrels. Damn it, Bethany. I wanted to retire, shouted one of the barista squirrels. Should have given it to me for my fine art, then, said the little gnome, before turning to Janet and explaining that the Fae hire people with Fae sight by tricking them into eating their Fae foods. All the staff were kids that were suckered in, and they could not go until they filled their position. Janet thought on this a moment. Thought on her quiet house and the dimming years of her life. Then swabbed her finger in the spilled drink and said, "Well, go on then. This cafe seems more fun for me anyways." Bethany was shocked, but not half as shocked as the squirrels, who spit out of the tree as 3 little boys who scurried off away. Janet wiped her counter. Tied her apron. And scratched between her whiskers before asking, "Who's next?" There you go. Sort of a story. All right. Gonna drink some water and then we'll read the story back. I lied, that wasn't water. Okay, if you're coming to this part of the show, it's because you just want to hear what we came up with. And what we came up with was in the context of a game called Excursions and Enchantments, which is a one-page tabletop RPG that is basically a story gen where you can see the Fae. The Fae have cafes, and you roll a dice 3 times and flip a coin once to get the details about that cafe, and then you sort of create stories within it. And we told the story of Janet. And the time she found a cafe in a tree hollow. I think it starts in first person and then it eventually goes to third. So, I mean, that's what you get when we're drafting in an hour. When she was a young girl, Janet saw the Fae that danced on the dewy leaves outside her window in the early dawn. But her mother said she didn't. So she decided she didn't. She ignored the songs she heard along the brook, from the brook along the path that wound between her home and school, because her teachers also said such songs weren't being sung by anyone but her imagination. So it went until it went, and she heard and saw the Fae no more. Soon she was a wife and a mother. She saw some happy days and, of course, many more sad ones, as life tends to be. But she lived in life in a practical way. And when her husband passed on, and the children soon stepped into larger shoes and wandered off out the door, she found herself hearing the melodies of that brook once more. She thought perhaps it was her mind slipping, as old Earl's had not 2 years before his passing. However, one day, as the dusk was creeping over the blue sky with its plumes of violet and fire, Janet saw a glimmer of lantern light emanating from the hollow of a large tree. And as she stepped closer, carefully placing her old gnarled walking stick, the one that Earl had carved, between where the great oak's roots bent up their knuckles, she began to make out songs that took her right back to her childhood, back to that brook, back to her hikes between the schools. The tree itself was shrouded in a morning glory vines that burst with morning glory blooms, but these were not the bone white of a typical morning glory flower. Instead, they were many-colored and shifting with the sounds from within the tree like so many ripples across a vast pond. She noticed that the flowering vines hung over a tree hollow about as wide as her grandmother's old vanity mirror. And when she pulled the drapery of the greenery aside, she found a wondrous sight. The tree's hollow was a peaceful cafe of small tables and low murmurs and strange tongues. There was a band playing low, peaceful music, accompanying a satyr's mournful flute solo. There were 2 fairies playing a game with a cricket in a cage who spoke with a London accent. He seemed quite perturbed at how they flicked and bothered him. All Janet could discern of his words was that he seemed to insist this was not a fair deal. Janet knew better than to intervene on the ill-fated mortals whom Fae have captured and transformed, especially this unfortunate Londoner cricket. Janet seemed to not have attracted much attention, though. Her face filled most the doorway to this strange little hollow. Not of the cricket, not of the fae, and not of the band. In fact, most in this peaceful cafe were more invested in an argument between a rosy-cheeked gnome who was arguing with one of the many squirrel baristas. The gnome was pleading for a freshen up to her empty cup with something called mushroom brew with acorn foam. And when Janet searched the menu over the barista's work area, she couldn't see such a thing listed. In fact, it was quite limited in its selections. The squirrel, the barista, rasped with a world-weary East Coast accent. "I already told you, Bethany. The menu here is limited. We weren't supposed to make you that in the first place, and I am especially not making it for free." The gnome, Bethany apparently, stomped her foot and with flushed, angry cheeks sputtered out the words, "It's not free. It's a trade, furball, and I'm going to give you a signed original for a simple drink." Bethany waved a peeled piece of birch bark that Janet could just discern had a sketch of a fairy whose legs were of uneven length and whose head held no reasonable proportion to the body. It was marred with the smears of many, many rubbings by an eraser, which revealed to her the other experiments in poor proportions that the young gnome artist had done that day. In all, Janet thought that her artwork was decent, or at least didn't want to say otherwise. It certainly wasn't what she would call a finished product. Feeling bad for the frustrated little artist gnome, Janet finally spoke up and said, "Well, how much is it then for a mushroom, the full mushroom thing?" Well, the band's flute solo suddenly spiked into a shriek that echoed the gasps and shock of all the fae in the cafe. Someone even spilled their hazelnut half-shell of pine nuts across the floor. The squirrels were the least surprised, having dealt with old ladies more than most. The squirrel raised an eyebrow and said, "Since you seem to have the fae sight, I can offer you and the gnome here a drink. It's a policy that should tall folk of the common world find a cafe of the fae, they get a free drink." The squirrel curled his fuzzy lip into a snarling grin. The gnome smiled at this and said, "Oh, well, as a thank, you can have a signed original." And she passed Janet her flawed and ill-proportioned sketch with all the confidence of Picasso. "Thank you, Bethany," Janet said. "Two mushrooms with a foam up," cried out one of the squirrels and slid 2 cups over the counter. The gnome grabbed them both and said, "Oh dear, Janet, here you go." But with a wink, the gnome dropped Janet's cup and let it spill upon the floor. Janet was disappointed until she heard the growl, the telling growl of those squirrels. "Damn it, Bethany! I wanted to retire!" shouted one of the barista squirrels. "Should have given it to me for my fine art, then," said the little gnome before turning to Janet and explaining that the fae hire people with fae sight by tricking them into eating their fae foods, which of course imprisons them. All the staff were kids that had been suckered in such a way, and they could not go home until they filled their position by garnering the same effect from another. Janet thought on this a moment and thought on her quiet house and the dimming years of her life, then swabbed her finger in the spilled drink upon the floor of that little peaceful cafe in the tree hollow, and before drinking the drop at the tip of her finger, said, "Well, go on then. This cafe seems more fun anyways." Bethany was shocked, but not half as shocked as the squirrels who spit out of the tree as 3 little boys and then scurried off away. Janet wiped her counter, tied her apron, and scratched between her whiskers before asking, "Who's next?" There you go. And that is our story of a Fae Cafe. Wow, it got hot in this room. Gia says, squirrels, chit, 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 chit. That's right, they make that funny little noise. Gia says, jolly little tale. I'm glad you like it. That game, I mean, if you can call it a game, that sort of story gen is available at you can get it from the Ping Common. I do believe this one was never something that costs money. But nonetheless, thank you, Witchery, for your owl facts. I had no idea there were ground owls. I am going to go find documentaries on such things now. Thank you, Holly's House, for recommending the little gnome character. I had a great fun with it. I hope I did some justice to your vision of it. And thank you, GS, for all your many suggestions, which I tried to incorporate as many as possible. And if you yourself out there in the wild world are watching this as a lurker, or after we finish recording, and you enjoyed it, or you appreciate something about the stream, the thumbs up, the little like button is the perfect way to show me that. Doesn't really do anything, frankly, with the algorithm. Maybe in vast quantities, but that's not happening with this stream. But it is a way to tell me that you liked it. And if you're not subscribed, you should, and you enjoyed this anyways, you might consider it. We just hit 150 subs. I'm not going to do anything about that just yet, because I'm always sort of cautiously optimistic and expect people to unsub any minute, which probably says more about me than anything about the show, but I like a little bit more of a buffer. But if there's something you think I should do for the 150 subs, that's a number I didn't expect to ever reach, then put your suggestions in the comments below. And yeah, Witchery says, always here to distract. We're here to waste time. This is not that important. that don't distract. Who knows? If I had more time, I probably would have worked in an owl, because that's kind of how creativity works. GS says, thanks for the charm, Roy. I'm envisioning this cute cafe. Yeah, I think it was a cool concept. I was going to say something about some plans I had going forward, but I think I'll leave them as surprises. Anyways, I'll be back on Tuesday with Folklore and Fairy Tales, and I'll be back on Thursday with another tabletop RPG. Witchery says, imagine if all 150 of us showed up. I'm sure that's not going to happen, because I have to assume at least like 50 of those are probably just spam follows. Anyways, thank you so much, everyone, for watching, everyone who lurked. Give it a like if you liked it. Beyond that, I really enjoyed hanging out with everybody, and I hope that you folks have a good night, but not here, because this is my store. And of course, get out of my shop.